These are Casacious coins. The first one of these that I sold in February is how I got scammed because I just was being really dumb and sent the money to a third party.
Welcome back to the show, guys. I've got with me today Austin Craig. Austin, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Glad to be here.
Tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I've got a visual aid off to the side, which is lifeonbitcoin.com, but tell the audience a little bit about yourself and why you're in crypto.
Sure thing. So the main thing that I am known for in crypto is in 2013, I was engaged, I was getting married, and I really wanted to get involved in cryptocurrency in a meaningful way. But I'm not a programmer, I'm not a cryptographer, I'm not a regulator, I'm not an economist, I'm none of the technical things that you would normally be to engage with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, especially in such an early date, 2013. I'd been following the subject as a point of personal interest, but I didn't have the technical skills to dive into code or cryptography. So what I did was use the skills that I do have. By trade, I'm a media producer, and I'd been doing commercial web videos for a number of years at that point. And me and my wife and a production crew got together and we did a documentary film about Bitcoin. But our hook was this: me and my wife would live on nothing but Bitcoin for the first 90 days of our post-honeymoon married life. We called it Life on Bitcoin, and we made that documentary and released it some years ago. And yeah, that was my first real foray into engaging with Bitcoin and blockchain and really diving headfirst into that world.
That's awesome. So from 0 to 100% full day in, day out adoption was your onboarding into Bitcoin, or at least the documentary.
Yeah, we like, I had been interested in the subject for a couple of years. I'd been reading about it, and I come from a small L libertarian background. You know, previous to doing that, I had worked for a super PAC for Ron Paul. I had been kind of a press agent for them, and I'd done, like I said, a whole bunch of commercial web videos for selling products and that kind of thing. And so this just seemed, a friend of mine actually suggested it. We were talking like, how can we get involved? We can buy Bitcoin, but that just seems so passive. Like, buy it? I'm not a rich man. I don't have a ton of money to like buy it and sway the market. I wanted to get involved in a way that would benefit me, but also like would mean something to this nascent space. And so a friend of mine who became a producer on the film, he's the one that suggested like, hey, you're getting married this summer, right? Why don't you and Becky, my then fiance, now wife, why don't you guys like live on Bitcoin and document the process? So we did a Kickstarter to raise money to hire a production crew, and raised about $73,000 on Kickstarter, and raised significantly more through sponsorships. And we had enough to hire a full-time feature film production crew to document our journey over 3 months.
That's awesome. And just as a reminder, I think I've asked you this once before, but the Kickstarter went entirely to production costs. None of that actually went to the core cost of living. Is that right?
Yeah. That was actually a huge point of failure on our part, is that we didn't communicate that thoroughly enough. We thought we were being really clever in our wording, and we said something like, thank you so much for your contributions. We literally couldn't live without you, or something like that, which really made it sound like we were taking that money and buying Bitcoin, and that's what we were going to live on. That was not the case at all. It was all to go toward hiring this production crew, people with cameras, people who could edit film, people who could put together a meaningful story. That would be the through line for this documentary, but also that was the kind of lens that we got to use to say to people like, hey, you're an expert, you're a security expert, you're a regulator, you're an investor, you're whatever technical field you're in, relevant to cryptocurrency, you're one of the world's preeminent people on this topic. We would really like to talk with you. We're living on Bitcoin. Will you sit down and do an interview? So people would come to hear the young couple living on internet funny money. But through the course of the documentary, our real goal was kind of a Trojan horse. We wanted people to learn about Bitcoin and what it could mean to their future. Again, this was in 2013. It was still at a time when most people had not heard of it. It's totally different today, but we were really trying to spread awareness.
That's awesome. So again, I thank you for going in depth about the distinction there between the funds raised for production of the documentary, production and post of the documentary, versus the cost of living, which you paid for out of your own darn pockets.
Yeah, that's what came out of our salary. Like, I had a job, my wife had a job. That was just our own money we were living on.
Yeah.
But to do anything with it, to pay for rent, gas, groceries, insurance, travel, entertainment, whatever it was, we had to turn it into Bitcoin. We had to buy Bitcoin, and then we had to convince somebody else to transact with us using Bitcoin. So a lot of what we did, interestingly enough, with a lot of education, because again, most people hadn't heard of it. And if we wanted people to accept Bitcoin, we had to teach them what Bitcoin was.
That's so awesome. So did you have the chalkboard lesson down to a science? I mean, did it look like the little ride at Jurassic Park, right? With this is
Dino
DNA.
DNA.
Right? Yeah. This is
Yeah, we got
Bitcoin.
pretty practiced at the pitch what it was, and had various different ways of approaching it that could make it very readily understandable. We relied a lot on metaphors because when you're trying to teach somebody what Bitcoin is, this is a technology that breaks new ground on multiple fronts. And unless somebody has really thought about how conventional money works, what is the difference between money and currency, right? They're not the same thing. Um, Unless they'd really given consideration to those, a, a, a succinct technical explanation wouldn't really do it. We had to use metaphors and analogies and say things like, what email did for conventional mail, Bitcoin is doing for money on the internet. It's internet native money and currency. Um, I can email you some money, right? That was one thing that we did with a lot of folks is we want you to accept some Bitcoin. Well, I don't know how to accept Bitcoin. Don't worry, I can email it to you. And what we would do was use a very early version of Coinbase, but Coinbase was live in 2013. We'd get on Coinbase and we would send money to somebody and I'd say, what's your email? And enter that in. And then they would get an email that they had been sent money via Coinbase and they had to register an account to accept that Bitcoin. And it just made it supremely easy for them and kind of dangled this little piece of Bitcoin in front of them that they'd accepted, that they now had to set up a Coinbase wallet, which you can say what you will about Coinbase. It's not a pure Bitcoin wallet. They are totally custodial. I understand that. But the ease of onboarding is what, frankly, a lot of people need if they're even going to touch their toe in the water here. That's a step in the right direction.
Sure.
So
Hey,
most
totally
folks,
agree. I
that's
think
kind of how we approached it.
yeah, I think even some of the most diehard followers of the channel, and this channel was built on proof of work mining, so they are among the most diehard people who will build systems and build small micro data centers that are fully dedicated to mining. So
Yep.
warehouses upon warehouses full of systems, and even the most diehard, they know that in some cases you have to deal with the question of custody, and especially when you bring in people who don't want to become information systems engineers or specialists. If you don't want to have to deal with understanding databases and what the difference is between a blockchain and a database, or
Right.
understanding even public and private key cryptography, there are some people who just don't want to hear it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's not a shock. That's not a shock. But at the same time, there are a lot of the cypherpunks are going to be saying, "Shame on you for not educating them all the way." Right? You can do no right in the crypto
So
sphere's eyes.
yeah, and I don't hold it against folks who are critical of that aspect. I've encountered that plenty. I went to the crypt what is it? The Institute for Crypto Anarchy a few years ago in Prague. I was speaking there on decentralized organizations and how cryptocurrency impacts what you can do with a decentralized organization. And I made the mistake. Everything you buy there has to be bought with Bitcoin or Ethereum. I think they accept Ethereum. Anyway, you have to buy it with cryptocurrency. And I came in and I tried to buy something using my Coinbase account. Like I opened the Coinbase app and tried to send somebody some Bitcoin that way. And they were like offended that I at the Institute for Crypto Anarchy. It's like, why are you using Coinbase? They called me Coinbase boy. It was totally like a put down, like, how dare you? So I felt thoroughly shamed at that event. But I did try to teach people about the potential of Bitcoin along the way. Like, here, I'm going to send it to you using Coinbase. But once you have a Coinbase account, you can take your Bitcoin and you can essentially do whatever you want with it. You don't have to keep it there. You can keep it in your own wallet where you control it, where nobody, not the NSA, not the FBI, not space aliens, nobody can get to it. It's all yours. And that's what makes this special. That was
Yeah,
a big part of what we're talking to people about is what makes this different, what makes it special. It's
sure.
not just a payment system, PayPal and Venmo do that.
Yeah,
Why is this different?
sure.
And
Yeah,
the
PayPal does it.
sovereignty of
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And PayPal does it. PayPal does it better, does it faster, and Venmo does it just as transparently as Bitcoin does in terms of third parties being able to observe your transaction. Um, I the meme on crypto Twitter among the people who are just a little more diehard. I will Let's be real. I'm not that hardcore. But the guys who are get a chuckle out of me saying that Bitcoin is the Venmo of cryptocurrency because you broadcast to everyone what you've just done. So
Right.
so we're in this weird space, right? I mean, obviously hindsight is perfect. I'm not going to complete that sentence. Lest you reach through the video chat and punch me in the face. Hindsight, we've got all of this experience now within cryptocurrency that shows that some networks are transparent and others a little less so, right?
Yeah.
They have zero knowledge proofs, they have zero knowledge systems to help assist people transact with greater privacy, greater anonymity. Before we jump into that, right, the future of Bitcoin from that, post that snapshot of 2013, when you were actively promoting and actively evangelizing for Bitcoin, and nobody was paying you to go evangelize other than the fundraising for a documentary. Nobody was paying you to evangelize, to each of these people that you've helped to onboard into cryptocurrency. Let's jump back and talk about what informed that opinion. You mentioned having done some work for Ron Paul super PACs. My wife and I were in Austin, Texas at the time, and I think that's something that we had in common and maybe didn't know. But we were in Austin, Texas at the time where there was a great super PAC in North Austin that my wife volunteered at. But I don't think we were as heavily involved as you were. What informed your opinion? Where did you start down this path? Like, what was the inciting incident for you? The point at which you just said, I have to change something about the way I either view the world or behave in the world regarding money.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've always been interested in technology. And in my adult life, I guess in my adolescence as well, as I've increasingly just come to the view that technology, it affords us possibilities that didn't exist before. Uh, Superpowers in the real world only come about via two ways. There's only two ways you can do something bigger than yourself: cooperation and technology. You work with other people and you use advanced tools, and you can do incredible things. And like I said, my kind of political philosophical background was very much from a libertarian place of thinking that generally things go better and are more just when you let people do their own thing. As long as somebody's not hurting people or taking their stuff, generally we should let people do their own thing. And Bitcoin was interesting to me at first because it was like this radically new technological system. And I think I understood pretty early on that it was also non-custodial. I'm not sure I would have described it that way at the time in 2011 or 2012, but I understood that it was something that you controlled yourself and nobody else could access it. Really nobody, if you managed your keys correctly. And I have a chat log from 2011 where I'm talking with my buddy Rob, an old roommate. And I say to Rob, "Hey man, have you been able to figure out Bitcoin mining? I really want to get into mining, but I don't understand this." And he's like, "Well, maybe you can get further than I could because I couldn't figure it out either." So like I have this failed attempt from 2011 to get into Bitcoin mining. And I saw the market, Bitcoin has always had a volatile history in its price fluctuations. And I'd been around for a couple years by 2013, long enough to have seen some rallies and drop offs. And in early 2013, there was this huge rally and Bitcoin went up to $120, mind blowing at the time. And I'd been around since it was single digit, $4 or something like that. And I think in that chat log with my friend Rob, I said, I should look it up. I think I said like, "Well, man, I already missed the opportunity. It's now at like $4. Like, how am I ever going to get ahead of the curve now?"
Like in your mind, hitting price parity with the dollar or something was like,
Right.
was
It's
you
like,
arrived.
the train has left the station, man. There's just no way for me to get on board now. But by 2013, it went up to $120, crazy rally, went parabolic, and then it crashed down, and then it stabilized. And what were people saying? People were saying Bitcoin is dead. It's at less than half of its all-time high. It's still just this fringe experiment on the internet. And it was striking me as just mind-blowing that people were saying Bitcoin is dead. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's incredibly robust. Look at the history. We've seen these rallies and collapses numerous times by this point. And again, this is in 2013. Like, it does the same thing. It rallies, it goes 10x, it drops off, it stabilizes at less than half or about half. And then it goes for a long time, kind of quietly, before it does it again. That's happened over and over and over. And in fact, the time since then has just seen that validated. it's happened again and again and again. And so my thinking was like, this is a technological Pandora's box. This is not going away, and it presents a rock and a hard place, right? We have the ever increasing power of a surveillance state, technology empowering governments and people in power to continually want to exert their power over other people. And in an information society, information is power, right? If you know everything about everyone, you have power over them. And that by 2013, that was becoming more and more apparent. Again, I come from this kind of libertarian background. And incidentally, we launched our Kickstarter the same week as the Edward Snowden revelations came to light. And we thought that that news was going to totally eclipse our project. We were really afraid we weren't going to be able to raise enough money. We did, thankfully.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, how did it affect it? Did it wind up helping it at all? Did anyone mention like, oh my gosh, yeah, Bitcoin. Bitcoin makes sense to me because of what Snowden said.
Logically, you can get there, but the steps between the United States government is dragnet surveilling its own people and Bitcoin as a tool for liberation was too wide a gap, and it was all happening at once. Nobody really got there in the press cycle that we needed them to. We did get some press. I was working with some smart marketers, and I have marketing experience myself, so we got press and we got the contributions that we needed. But even before Edward Snowden's revelations, there had been other clear indicators. Some people watching may or may not have heard of Bill Binney, who was an NSA architect who helped design the system that is in Utah. There's an NSA data center in Utah, not far from where I live, that was already up. And he was saying he'd become a whistleblower. He had said the United States government is surveilling its own people. I know, not because I saw it, but because I built the system. I was the chief architect. And he was coming from this place of authority where it's like nobody could argue that he wasn't a chief architect at the NSA. It was very clearly in his work history. And he'd been raided by the FBI when he blew the whistle on this system. So it's like legitimate channels had been explored and basically nothing had changed. Legitimate channels for recourse, for pushback against the surveillance state. I'm getting very long-winded, but the point is by 2013, it was very clear to me that there was this ever-increasing surveillance state that was not going away. And here was this Pandora's box, this technology of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency that had the clear potential to wrest power away from federalized, centralized government. And how were those two going to navigate each other? How were they going to get along? There's a fundamental conflict there that I think a lot of people either ignored or didn't realize. But for me, it was very clear, like these two are going to come to a head. There's no world where Bitcoin thrives and the federal government is really happy about it, or vice versa. And so I just wanted to explore that. There was so much fascinating intellectual material here, philosophical governance material here to explore. I wanted to get into the ideas of Bitcoin and explore those in a meaningful way. And a film about it seemed the most straightforward way to do that. Though making the film was certainly, it's making a documentary film is not a straightforward endeavor, as you may know, Seth.
Yeah, so I've only been involved in a couple of documentaries myself. Only a couple that I felt were funded to the point that that made sense. Documentaries are, as you know, they're tricky, and So awesome. Clearly, in part, or maybe in this the final analysis, a labor of love, really making the documentary, that final push towards distribution. We can talk about that maybe another time. I think that's maybe not the central through line of the show, but it is out there. People can watch it now. What kind of feedback have you gotten? Now, talking about what informed your opinion before, lowercase L libertarianism or lowercase L liberty orientation and liberty mindedness. You've mentioned, not in these words, but the non-aggression principle on more than one occasion so far in the interview. And just talking about sound money. I think also I've seen you go on record talking about gold, for example, and following Peter Schiff. Yep. Clearly, you're not a maybe you're a Bitcoin mostimalist, but maybe not a Bitcoin maximalist, right? Is that what I'm gathering?
Can we go with Bitcoin mostimalist? I think that's that's like about the space that I occupy, right? Like, I'm kind of in the same space as Eric Voorhees of Shapeshift.io, where people ask him, like, are you a Bitcoin maximalist? Do you think, Ethereum has any validity or credibility or legs to go the long haul? And Eric is very vocal and straightforward in answering and saying, I believe in competing currencies. I believe in a market for currency itself. So let's have a bunch of them out there. And if one of them wins by virtue of its network effects, by virtue of its engineered capabilities, then great. It can have a virtual monopoly because people want to use it. But as soon as somebody comes up with something that's superior and they're smart enough to know how to market and spread the idea of it, something else will come along. I occupy very much the same space. I think competing currencies make great sense if you're talking about prosperity and human flourishing. If you're talking about maintaining state power, not so much. So yeah.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, to what extent? To what extent now? Here we are in the year 2020. I mean, last year, it's the first time that American taxpayers have ever been asked by the IRS directly, have you dealt in digital currencies? Have you bought, sold, or traded digital currencies? And then with the clarification being pretty obvious, we're talking about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They're on to us, right? To what extent do you think Bitcoin can be hijacked as a tool of state surveillance? Maybe not state control, but like, as you mentioned before, information is power. So if they know how much you have or who you're transacting with, it's just another data fingerprint for them, right? If they know who your Bitcoin identity.
Right.
What do you think about that moving forward? A lot has changed, right, since 2013. Even within like Bitcoin proper, it's not as common. Even within the protocol itself, apparently used to be able to send to an IP address. Not so anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you make of the changes? Do you think there is a real risk of networks like Bitcoin being the injection site for federal poison? Or
that's a good question. I think that certainly federal authorities will try to do that, and I think there's evidence that they already have. I should be careful to make that accusation because I remember reading years ago, and it was years ago at this point. I've got a 4-year-old. It was before my 4-year-old was born, so it was like 5 years ago. There was a point where the network had a bunch of dust in the system, and it was some kind of attack from somewhere. And there were numerous instances where it's like, this is a coordinated enough attack that this could probably be a federal, a sovereign government might be attacking the network. But those attacks ultimately failed. And the network persists. A lot of businesses are engaging with Bitcoin in a way that's totally regulatory compliant. We've already talked about Coinbase. We've talked about the pros and cons of Coinbase. And if you're engaging with Bitcoin via those compliant organizations, then you are part of the system, right? Like Coinbase is basically a bank. Gemini is basically a bank. You use these things because they're convenient, not because they afford you true sovereignty and give you custodial power over your own money. But I think we're at a point now, and frankly, smart people have been for a long time, more concerned with, okay, how do I use this opportunity of Bitcoin, of cryptocurrency, for its full potential? How do I become my own bank where I truly do control everything? It's just tough because that requires a few things. It requires building really robust systems that aren't going to have horrible bugs or gaping holes in them that people can engage with in a meaningful way and scale in a meaningful way. The Bitcoin network itself has done that, and it's kind of a miracle, right? Like, this is kind of an amazing, I can't believe it actually worked miracle. But we need more than just the blockchain, right? We need numerous tools that will allow people to engage with this technology in a truly anonymous way, or pseudonymous if they so choose way. But developing those tools is a slow, laborious process. There are going to be all kinds of hurdles to actually get there, not least of which is, how do you sustain them? How do you pay for them? Because if it's not an incorporated business that's paying their payroll tax or whatever it is, and doesn't have like a clear profit model, we're kind of on the frontier of how these decentralized networks can pay for themselves. And it's getting figured out right now.
Right.
But we're all going to be better off if we can hasten that development as much as possible. I'm eager to see more adoption along those lines. And frankly, people have suggested that I do like a Life on Bitcoin 2. And I'm like, that would be an entirely different thing today. It would fundamentally be a different kind of effort. but there's a similar challenge where, like, in 2013, I wanted to teach people about Bitcoin. Today, it's like people have heard of Bitcoin, but what they need to really understand is that, like, you can be the master of your own destiny. You can have sovereign control of your own life, and if you know how to play your cards right, you can kind of like keep prying eyes off of what you do online. And people don't understand that, and the tools are still kind of esoteric. I think there needs to be an effort made to broadcast greater education on that front.
Awesome. Well, I agree with quite a bit of what you said there, but a life on Bitcoin too sounds intriguing. I've got to ask as a follow up, would you consider life on privacy oriented alts as long as there's enough liquidity in the market? I mean, is that too dark a shade of gray for you to put that hat on?
Maybe. I also have a wife and 3 kids now, where before it was me and Becky, and we were newly married and we were young and energetic and excited. It's one thing I've always loved about my wife is she's always up for adventure and a challenge. But now it's like we've got 3 kids, we've got a mortgage, we're living a very, like, I don't know, suburban stable life. And I don't know how far I can push Monero from my current position, as it were. But I do think something needs to be done there, right? So, like, whether it's life on Bitcoin 2 or life on privacy-focused altcoins, or whether it's something completely else, so completely different, I feel like now is the time when people, especially as we've got the federal government increasingly involved in people's lives financially as they're trying to protect the economy. There's stimulus checks going out now. UBI is a serious part of the discussion, and regardless of your stance on UBI, whether you think it's the greatest idea ever or whether you think it's a serious problem economically or otherwise, one thing is for certain: if UBI becomes part of our lives, virtually everybody will become reliant on that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, nobody can entirely opt out. To your point, it's right. A level setting, total rather it levels the playing field in so many different areas. And those who opt out, they better really, really have business developed to an extent that they are comfortable opting out of a UBI system when it's implemented. So yeah, I hear you. It'll hit the middle of America, right? Definitely like a tidal wave.
Yeah.
And then those who've worked really hard. Who've already been vocally oppositional towards UBI, it's likely to hit them hardest, right? They feel like something's being taken away from them.
This is kind of a continuation of what initially got me interested in Bitcoin. It was like, here is this technology that mathematically cannot be intervened, cannot be objected to by federal authorities. They can slam their fist on the table, they can scream and shout, they can try to harass people, but at the end of the day, they can't control the network. I think there are numerous other technologies coming about now that do this in a lot of different ways, and maybe they're blockchain involved, maybe they're not. But the collection of these different tools, I think, is a powerful force if we can get it into people's hands and we can get people using it. And so if I did something like a life on Bitcoin 2, it really would try to focus in that area. I don't think I'd call it Life on Bitcoin 2, frankly. Got to call it something else. Maybe it wouldn't even be a documentary film. But
sure.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done there. There are a lot of ideas that should be explored, and that's where I would be most excited to look.
That's awesome. So it seems very much like your focus is now and basically has always been one of education and making sure that you're helping anybody who's approaching Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies in general, even just the concepts of sound money and non-aggression principle, that you're trying to teach them from first principles so they can onboard and have really good habits from day one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bravo. Definitely applaud that. There's
and frankly, like, I'm still learning a lot of this stuff myself. Like I said, like, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a coder. I'm not writing this stuff. Public key cryptography is something that I understand at a broad conceptual level, but please don't ask me to like engage with it on a code level, because I'll be utterly lost. But I think, if people understand these things in a broader sense, in a conceptual, ideological sense, then we can get there, right? Not everyone has to be a coder. They need to understand the general principles, and they can engage with it in a meaningful way.
All right. Yeah. Hey, totally agreed. And yeah, if we waited for everybody to be a coder, then we would have to wait for an entire generation of people to die off in the first place before there's any adoption. And then we'd have to replace every profession with something within programming. Yeah, unlikely. There are a lot of people who are pushing for it, right? What was that? It was trending hashtag on Twitter, right? Learn to code, but it was used as a jab towards journalists?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably even support an initiative where we try to teach everyone to code. I would love to learn to code. I've kind of started down that road numerous times in my life. But the fact is, unless you dedicate yourself to the task in a meaningful, prolonged way, i.e., your full-time education leading into a meaningful career in the space, that's a technical skill probably not going to stick for somebody who's spending just a tiny bit of time on it every now and then. Um, and that's not how most technical skills are in our lives. You learn them because technical stuff. You you have a technician who takes care of the technical stuff for you. Most of us aren't going to be involved in code in that way, and probably can't. Certainly not unless there's some dramatic shift in how society and education operate on a pretty fundamental level. I don't see that happening in the near future.
I think you're probably right on some level. Yet at the same time, we are our parents' generation. They were among the first PC users to have to suffer through DOS and entirely text based operating systems. They didn't have the benefit of using a mouse, for example,
Right.
or a mouse paired with their keyboard. They didn't have any like fancy graphics rendering engines that came along in the Apple and then the Mac days. They had to deal with booting something up from one floppy drive, maybe, or some other medium, and then having to go through several terminal commands just to get the operating system loaded. So, I mean, it's very clear that some of the stuff can be taught. Some of these very, what's like you mentioned before, they seem like very esoteric tools. They can be taught to people
Yeah.
of average intelligence. So I guess I kind of wonder, like, what is the incentive? How do we align incentives to get more people, whether they understand the difference between PGP cryptography or GPG cryptography,
Right.
right? As
Right.
tools, how do we just get them to use it? You know?
Good question, and it's something I've thought about before. Here's a question, and this is a sincere question for you and or your listeners. Is there a fundamental trade-off between true autonomy and control of your life online, your privacy, your money, your information, everything, and ease of use? Is there a fundamental trade-off? i.e., if something has true autonomy for the user, is it fundamentally going to be harder than if it was custodial? It seems like that's the case, though, on a basic philosophical or technical level. I'm not sure I can't say, yes, absolutely, that's 100% true. But it kind of seems like it is.
I think you're probably right. I lean, yeah, I tend to think that that's true, and I tend to think that's true for a couple of reasons. Um, I mean, not to be trite, but the old saying, anything you know, anything worth having, right, comes at a cost, right? Anything
Yeah.
worth doing is worth
Yeah.
doing well, and that it's just sort of generally understood that requires effort or at least smart work. And
Yeah.
and yeah, so I think and we look at or we'll invoke Malcolm Gladwell. We haven't talked about him yet, right? But the 10,000 hours, right? The concept of
Right.
10,000 hours. Um, I promise I won't drag him into it anymore topically, but 10,000 hours to achieve mastery of anything. And I think maybe it doesn't require mastery to be able to have good enough autonomy. And I think that there's probably a balance where people just don't understand that they don't have to get to 10,000 hours on task with protecting their privacy to get good enough privacy that it's better than prying eyes from the government and from advertisers today. I think,
Yeah.
in my opinion, I think that's the biggest concern, and maybe that's the message that that I've been trying to promote here on the channel is that just a little bit of focus on it goes a long way. And as you mentioned before about coding,
I've heard you use the phrase I've heard you use the phrase privacy hygiene or something like that before.
yeah, yeah,
So that's not a phrase that I was previously familiar with, but it's the perfect metaphor. I just read a book about kind of the evolution of ideas and adjacent ideas in technology, the adjacent possible. It's a book by Stephen Kotler, and how we got to, not Stephen Kotler, excuse me, Stephen Johnson. Two different authors. I love them both, but this book was by Stephen Johnson. It was called How We Got to Now. And he talks about how, glass makers in Italy ages ago invented glass that was clear and optically, pristine. And that allowed telescopes and spectacles and microscopes to be invented. There was an adjacent possible that nobody was aiming at, but it took them one step closer to these incredible possibilities. And he talked about hygiene. He talked about clean water and germ theory. And he talked about the horrible conditions in cities and centers of population before germ theory was well understood. People lived these miserable, awful lives that were dirty and short, and they had no idea why they were dying from horrible diseases and why it was a bad idea to do an autopsy in this room and then to go over here and deliver a baby, why child mortality was so high when you did that. Um, Now we have germ theory now, and we understand that basic hygiene, like soap and water, wash your hands before you go from the autopsy to the childbirth, makes an incredible difference. But getting that idea out there in a way that's broadly understood, you don't have to be a biologist to understand hygiene practices. You just have to know the basic ideas and exercise those habits. I really like that metaphor for privacy and control of your personal information as well. It's hygiene, right? Like, what are the basic ideas and what are the basic habits you need to cultivate broadly so that people really do have control over their own information and their own lives? In a sense, we are in a pre-germ theory world right now where people are kind of becoming aware of that, but they don't have the habits to preserve their privacy. They don't have the hygiene in place.
Sure.
And so I guess hygiene education is what I would be most keen to see and be involved in.
Hmm. Thank you. First off, I'm flattered. I'm flattered that you picked up on that. I think with Tron Black and with Jeremy Anderson of the Ravencoin project, I coined the phrase wallet hygiene, and Tron picked up on that very quickly. He was on board with it. Within cryptocurrencies, there are different levels of this, right? The idea that you can't keep reusing the same dirty stuff, such
Right.
as a wallet, right? Address reuse within cryptocurrency. For people who don't know, that is a major, not attack vector so much as just data fingerprinting technique, right? So,
Right.
um, and it's weird how many metaphors you can draw here, right? Between like fingerprinting and keeping one's hands clean, or removing one's fingerprints. Then it makes
Yeah,
it
the
sound
metaphors emerge pretty organically. It's not like we're having to force anything here. I think it's a good overlay of our understanding for what needs to happen next is people need to start exercising better hygiene. And for them to do that doesn't require them getting a degree in biology. It's just a handful of habits that people need to be aware of and then habitually exercise, habitually do. And I say that like it's a simple thing, right? It's just a handful of exercises. As this pandemic has taught us, not everybody is hygienic in a conventional sense today. Some statistics were showing that some abysmally low number of people actually wash their hands when they leave the bathroom.
mm,
Like, it was just horrifying. But that's the kind of thing that we need to see spread more widely.
sure.
Hygienic.
Sure. I think you'll appreciate the crossover here when I was at a it's funny actually, I was shooting a documentary in Austin, Texas, and picking up lunch because it was a very, very small crew picking up lunch for our team, and I was at this Subway sandwich shop. This guy behind me, and maybe he was doing this to try to demonstrate his displeasure because I was taking a little time for a large order, and he pulls out his iPhone. These are relatively new, right? I think it's only the fourth, maybe fifth generation that had come out at that point. Pulls out his
Mhm.
iPhone, and his screen looks dirty. Sticks his tongue all the way out, flops his tongue all the way out, and licks it like an ice cream cone. Licks it clean
Are you kidding me?
in public. I mean, in plain view of people. He licks his phone, rubs it on his shirt, and then starts fiddling with whatever he was looking at before. And so I always look at that and think like, okay, well, this is, we need technology to be something that guy can understand. And we need hygiene
Right?
to be something
Yeah.
that guy can understand. Because if he can
Yeah.
understand it, if he can use it, right? I mean, not to be too crass, right? A lot of the audience knows that I'm a person of faith, but not to be too crass. If we can get that monkey to operate an iPhone, hopefully we
Yep.
can get that monkey to, as you said, take care of keys, right, for
Yep.
cryptocurrency.
Yep, and a lot of it is just building products that nudge people in the right directions and give them reminders when they need reminders. I think MyCrypto does a great job of this. I've heard Taylor Monahan talk about this before, where they realized in building MyCrypto that users who weren't familiar with this stuff or were coming in fresh were going to make horrible choices that they could not reverse unless they were really handheld, informationally handheld the whole way through, right? Like, I'm not going to take your keys out of your hands, but I am going to talk to you like a baby and tell you exactly what to do at each step of the process. If we have products that can do that, but do ultimately trust the user to behave responsibly and ultimately it's their responsibility, I think we can get there, right? I think that's a really great development to see people developing that kind of stuff.
I agree with you largely about this base level of education. Let's jump back into privacy, because everything that you have been doing in terms of education with Life on Bitcoin, your then fiance, then wife, agreeing to it. First off, kudos to her. I think that early in the general broad adoption cycle of Bitcoin, I think a lot of fiancés would have just said, like, it's what? How, we spend it how? You want to use
Right.
this instead of dollars?
Yep.
A lot of resistance, I'm sure, for anybody else. So kudos to the
She
both
knew
of
who
you.
I was when she got engaged to me. She knew what I was when she picked me up.
Awesome. Well, and you didn't throw her, right? You were like, all right, so let's crank this knob up to 11. See how that
Yeah,
kicks things off. That's
right off the
great. So now it sounds like you're sort of seeing the need for some measure of privacy, paired with, of course, all the cryptography that Bitcoin taught you, all those great habits that Bitcoin has taught you from those first exposures into then really jumping in head first. And now I think what I'm hearing from you is you're really wanting to push into a greater degree of day-to-day privacy. What does that
Yeah,
look like for you
absolutely.
today, and what do you think is on the roadmap for you in the near future?
That's a good question. I've continued to do a lot of things purely out of convenience, but even as I'm doing them, I recognize the trade-off that I'm making. That this is something that I'm doing because it's quick and it's easy, but there is a cost beyond even the monetary cost of, say, exchanging coins on something like Coinbase or Gemini. Those things are quick and easy, but your transaction will be surveilled. It will be reported to federal agencies. Um, and I'm not advising anybody to like evade federal agencies at all. What I am saying is we live in a world where outside parties are increasingly going to try to get into the inner workings of your life, your financial life, your thinking, your fundamental operations. I've experienced that on social media tremendously. I've been an avid user of social media for many years, basically its inception. Um, but the experience has just gotten so sour because of outside forces inserting themselves into the process, right? Like in 2004, when I got on Facebook, it was like, oh, this is a neat place to hang out with my friends. And now it's like I go there and people tell me that my politics are garbage and I'm a garbage human being. And, somebody's trying to sell me shoes that I don't particularly want. And somebody's serving me ads for something that's like kind of embarrassing and poorly targeted at me. I'm alternately amazed how poorly something is targeted and flabbergasted how well it's targeted, right? Like,
Right.
it's just a really unhealthy black mirror relationship with our technology today. And I don't think that that's fundamental to the technology at all. I think it's in the incentive structures that we've built. A lot of these things were built with incentive structures that were direct and easy, i.e., like, oh, we'll put advertising into it. Well, there's a long-term cost with that, not just for the individual, but ultimately for everybody involved, for the service provider who now has to compromise what they actually wanted to build for what the advertiser wants to pay for,
Sure.
and for the user who just was
Sure.
interested in talking with their friends, but is now going to have every single thing they do surveilled by an outside party that's going to then explicitly try to manipulate their behavior, right?
Sure.
Like, let's not kid ourselves. All of these organizations are surveilling our activity and gathering our information for the explicit purpose of manipulating our behavior to do something different than we would have done otherwise.
Now, what is it? What is
Uh,
it? Professor Galloway says that basically they exist to sell you an effing Nissan.
yeah,
That's his
yeah,
punchline. Yeah.
right. Like we have this perverse ecosystem online where people are, Mark Zuckerberg is testifying in front of Congress, and people are talking about how this is destroying democracy, and we've got outside governments hacking our election system, and for what? So that somebody can sell you a pair of shoes when you're looking at neat pictures on Instagram. Like that's what it comes down to. It's like, really? We're sacrificing these huge elements of our own inner, minds, our inner peace. Like people aren't happier after getting on Instagram. and going, on the infinite scroll. You don't walk away from that more fulfilled. You don't walk away from that closer to your long-term goals.
I
You
love it.
do it because it's sugar, right? Like we all have a couple different drives inside of us. I want to look like Captain America, but I also like to eat cupcakes. And increasingly, what we get from these things is digital cupcakes, where it's like, guys, please, I've been kind of explicit about this. Like, I guess I like icing on cupcakes, but man, I would like to, be healthier. Can we do that? Can you offer me something along those lines? And fundamentally, the business models are built in a way where it's really hard to do that. If we want a healthier ecosystem online, whether we're talking about cryptocurrency or otherwise, we have to fundamentally re-examine what these incentive structures are like, what it means to have a corporation, what the business relationship is between a user and a service provider and even an advertiser, right? Like there's this weird trifecta. Maybe we need to cut the advertiser out. Maybe we need to go to a direct subscription model for most of the things that we use. I don't know how I got down this tangent, Seth, but like I've got some strong opinions on how things are really unhealthy online today and how some basic changes could make them a lot healthier for virtually everybody involved,
Sure.
certainly in a macro sense.
Sure, totally makes sense, and I get the sense that if you'll do me the honor of coming back on for round two, I think we're gonna have some really great counterpoint on that one. I think I'm gonna be able to provide some parallax, just my view that I think we'll have some really great back and forth with regards to how maybe we start to escape from some of these really bad abusive relationships that we're in with social media and advertising and such. But today, for you with privacy and this newfound focus, what's a piece of advice that you give to the audience right now? Let's just say that, the audience is your niece, your nephew, your son or daughter who's just turning 14, or maybe 16, or whatever age you think is appropriate to get their first phone.
Yeah.
And you're saying, okay, young one, this is how you stay safe in today's world.
It's funny because I've done this exact thing that you're talking about. I have teenage nieces and nephews, and I've talked to them about various pieces of advice on technology and how they engage online. A couple different thoughts there. I would talk to them about how important it is to have a conceptual understanding of what privacy really means and how it is ultimately valuable. We've been conditioned in a lot of ways to disregard the value of our privacy. And again, coming back to kind of the you know cupcakes or broccoli analogy, like they're it's easy to disregard privacy. It's easy to disregard owning your own information and making some short-term decisions that are a lot simpler. But those have long-term consequences, even if we can't see the end of that road right now from where we stand. But also, I think a lot of my nieces and nephews, a lot of young people today, they kind of understand a lot of this stuff that we were naive to when, in my early 20s, I got involved in social media. And now it's like people my age, I'm in my mid 30s, and people now are very much coming to terms with the reality that like there's a lot of embarrassing stuff that I posted that I don't want my employers to know about today, or I don't want other people to know about today. And you can't actually take it all down. Clearview.ai, are you familiar with them at all?
Yes. Yeah.
They're a facial recognition company that has contracts with primarily in North America, or so they claim, law enforcement agencies, whether federal or local. And it's basically a search engine for faces. And the video on their main website shows it in use. And they're working with a CNN reporter. And they search the guy's face. And the first results are pictures of him today. It's professional profiles. It's stuff that would be pretty easy to find if you even just had his name and you wanted to search some information about the man. But it also found pictures that were over a dozen years old. It found pictures of him from like grade school. And he was very surprised about that. But that's the reality that we're facing is like, if you put something up, it kind of doesn't matter what the terms of service are. It doesn't matter if you delete it later on. Once it's out there in the wild, it's not going to 100, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. I think a lot of the younger people today get that on an almost intuitive level. And their relationship with a lot of these social platforms and with technology is kind of more distant in a way. They're not as intimate with it the same way that I might have been in my 20s. I'm thinking of my nephews who are in their early 20s right now, and like their digital footprint right now is like kind of silly, frivolous stuff, but none of it is like silly or frivolous in a way that's personally incriminating. It's not
Sure.
them doing, a
Sure. They're not flying they're not flying their far left or their far right political flag at all then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's brilliant. Okay. So it sounds like then the advice that you would give to these people, they're kind of already intuiting then. Great.
In a way. In a way. We also like have to use digital technology. So I guess I would say to them, like, you should just be aware of these principles of privacy so that when you do need to use these tools more extensively, because you will in your life, it's inevitable. You know how to use them in a responsible fashion where you stay in the driver's seat.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, with that, then I think we should probably wrap the show. Austin, thank you so much for taking this time, and thank you so much for going back over. I know, I mean, this is a project that has taken a life of its own, clearly almost 10 years in the making, and still out. It's a line that you have out in the water. Audience, please go to lifeonbitcoin.com, find an outlet that you are comfortable with in watching it, and go watch it. Go take a look.
Yeah.
So
It's a historical document at this point, and frankly, I'd be eager to distribute it more widely. So if people want a crypto native fashion to distribute this in, please get in contact with me. Email me. I'm easy to find online, but let me know. How else should we be distributing this?
Austin, thank you again for your time. Always a pleasure catching up.